Build professional skills this semester with Adobe Creative Cloud and create standout work both in and out of the classroom. Save big on professional creativity tools. Students get 65% off Adobe Creative Cloud, including Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, Acrobat Pro, and 20+ creative apps. No matter what project you're working on, Adobe Creative Cloud apps can help you take it to the next level. Visit adobe.com/student to learn more.
Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome. I'm Roger Stone, your host for The Roger Stone Show on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. For the next 2 hours, we're going to be talking news, politics, history, style, and of course, food. So don't miss a moment of our great programming here at 77 WABC. We are the crown jewel of Talk AM radio. So I urge you to go immediately to the App Store on your cell phone and download the 77 WABC app. That way you won't miss any of our great talk or entertainment programming here on the most dynamic and influential AM radio station in America today. All eyes, of course, are on the Trump hush money trial. President Donald Trump denied falling asleep in court, although it's easy to understand how the peripatetic and constantly in motion Donald Trump might be extraordinarily bored. But when members of the media accused him of dozing in the courtroom, he said in a social media post, "Contrary to the fake news media, I don't fall asleep during the crooked DA's witch hunt, especially not today. I simply close my beautiful blue eyes sometimes, listening intensely to take it all in." You gotta love that guy. On our show today, one of the president's lawyers, Alina Habba, will talk to us about the so-called hush money case. Looking forward to that. The more I watch the travesty of Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's case against President Donald Trump, well, the more I realize to my horror that my own prosecution 3 years ago was the prototype, the template, the dry run for the politically motivated attempt to convict President Donald Trump to jail in order to interrupt his likely return to the White House. There's actually a video, it's only about 6 months old, in which President Joe Biden was asked directly, "Aren't you worried about a rematch with President Trump?" And he said, "No, not going to let him run. Going to use the Constitution, not going to let him run." I think it is right there. I mean, it tells you everything you need to know. This is a politically motivated tsunami of lawfare designed to stop Donald Trump's inexorable return to the White House. I mean, even if Donald Trump was guilty of the financial transactions he's accused of, which, by the way, he vehemently denies, this would be at worst a business records civil case. And that the Biden Department of Justice had to import their number 3 official, a gentleman named Coangelo, to prosecute the case on behalf of DA Bragg speaks volumes regarding the political motivation of this prosecution. Was there no one in Mr. Bragg's office capable of presenting this case. On the other hand, as the criminal defense attorney David Schoen pointed out the other day in an interview on my show, The Stone Zone, their problem here is there is no case. In other words, there is no underlying crime. If business records were altered, what purpose were they altered for? The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York examined all these transactions, and they found no crime. The Federal Election Commission examined all these transactions, and they found no crime. So it is extraordinary, however, that in the trial, the judge has essentially prohibited Donald Trump and his lawyers from raising the facts of those two previous investigations which exonerated Trump. But it is absolutely unbelievable now when you look in retrospect at the gag. I was gagged in my trial. You'll recall that Special Counsel Robert Mueller, taking advantage of my 45-year friendship with Donald Trump, charged me not with Russian collusion, not with WikiLeaks collaboration, not with any other serious crime, but with the alleged crime of lying to Congress under oath, supposedly to conceal the Trump campaign's coordination with WikiLeaks over the release of documents, none of which the prosecutors ever proved. Almost a year after losing everything, our home, our car, our insurance, our savings, most of our insurance, our savings, my ability to make a living in 2 years of constant stress, on November 3rd, 2020, only because BuzzFeed, now out of business, but a left-wing media operation, sued the Department of Justice, demanding that Special Counsel Robert Mueller release his entire, complete, unredacted final report. I guess the guys at BuzzFeed thought there'd be something in there that was harmful to me that was being concealed, when in fact it was published on November 3rd, 2020, which is Election Day, which is the busiest media day of the year, and it was released at midnight of that day, and even there, Robert Mueller could not sugarcoat the fact that he had found no evidence of Russian collusion, WikiLeaks collaboration, or any other crime for that matter. It's amazing, of course, that CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Associated Press, not a single one of them reported the fact that I had been essentially exonerated. And so it is with Donald Trump. Just as I realized that it would be impossible in the District of Columbia to get a jury that was not all comprised of Trump-hating liberals and Democrats, I moved for a change of trial venue, which was, of course, denied. President Donald Trump faces a similar problem in Manhattan, where his motion to change venue was similarly denied. And then, of course, there is the question of the judge. Now, in this case, Judge Juan Merchant actually gave a $15 contribution to Joe Biden's presidential campaign. Now, the judicial canon of ethics specifically says that judges are not supposed to give political contributions. And to me, it doesn't matter that this contribution is just $15. It doesn't matter whether it's 15 or 1,500 or 15,000, although 15,000 I think would exceed the federal limit. it demonstrates the bias of the judge. We've also learned through the intrepid investigative reporting of Laura Loomer that the judge's adult daughter is a Democrat fundraising consultant, and that she's raised over $93.5 million for the Biden-Harris campaign, which is one of her clients. That's a very clear conflict of interest. The judge's daughter will make money on the case being presided over by her father. Yet Trump's lawyers have moved multiple times now to recuse the judge, and the judge refuses to step down. The gag order itself is a monstrosity. It is patently unconstitutional. Nowhere in our Constitution does it say that if one is accused of a similar crime, that they will forfeit their First Amendment. Simply does not work that way. But the problem you have is that by the time an appeal of the unconstitutional gag order works its way through the appeals court, the trial will be over. Just last week, the judge fined Donald Trump over $9,000, maybe actually more later in the week that I didn't see, for various violations of this gag order. Let me get this straight. Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels and others are allowed to attack Trump at will on MSNBC, CNN, TikTok, and so on. Michael Cohen actually making money on his TikTok solicitations. But Donald Trump's not allowed to defend himself. Un-American. And to go a step further, the judge made it clear last week that if Trump violated the gag order again, he would be subjected to incarceratory punishment. I had to look that word up. What it means is the judge will put him in jail if he dares to defend himself. Again, I point out the problem I had of getting an unbiased jury in the District of Columbia. Trump has the exact same problem. Impossible, really, for him to get a Manhattan jury that isn't virtually completely comprised of liberal Democrats who are hostile to them. I just find it comical that you have in jury selection these people who say, essentially, yeah, I hate Donald Trump's guts. I think he's a danger to democracy, but I can definitely be objective in this proceeding, in this trial. Outrageous. After the judge in my case praised the jury forewoman who was actually caught lying during jury selection in my trial, insisting during jury selection and the trial that she didn't know who I was, she knew very little about my case, when in fact she had been a Democratic candidate for Congress in Tennessee and been attacking both me and Donald Trump on Twitter and Facebook for an entire year prior to being selected as a juror in my case. So to make this clear, she was attacking me on Twitter and Facebook by name regarding the very case that she said she knew nothing about and would later be chosen as a juror. Of course, my lawyers moved to dismiss the case and for a new trial based on the forewoman's bias, denied by the judge. Judge Amy Berman Jackson said there was no conflict, that this was not a evidence of bias. And so it is with Donald Trump. He only needs one, as many legal observers have pointed out. Just one juror can present or could produce a hung jury, and therefore no conviction. I have my doubts that that's going to happen, but hope springs eternal. Interestingly enough, one of the witnesses this week was Keith Davidson. Keith Davidson was a witness for Alvin Bragg in his case. Keith Davidson was the lawyer who represented Stormy Daniels. But what no one asked Mr. Davidson was whether it was true that Davidson had been arrested in a sting regarding the Hulk Hogan sex tape extortion scheme, and he avoided being charged in that matter in return for his testimony in New York, in return for diming Michael Cohen and exposing the entire Stormy Daniels matter. Now, I've had some personal experience with Mr. Cohen. Michael Cohen testified before the House and the Senate committee that he overheard a phone conversation on the speakerphone between candidate Trump and myself in 2016, in which I told candidate Trump something that he could have read online anywhere, which was that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange had announced that they had materials on the DNC and Hillary Clinton, and that they would release them in October. First, Mr. Cohen testified that this took place in July of 2016, but then, on the urging of prosecutors, he changed his mind and said it happened in August of 2016. The woman secretary, the woman assistant to Trump, who he claimed entered the room to say, Mr. Trump, Roger Stone is on line one, has no memory of this happening. And by the way, there is no telephone record that bolsters Mr. Cohen's claim. That's because it's false. I can tell you exactly when this phone call took place. That would be never. Why would we even be discussing in August, which was already a public matter? This is why Michael Cohen was not called as a witness in my trial. Remember, I was charged with making misstatements to Congress, even though none of those misstatements hid any underlying crime, such as Russian collusion, WikiLeaks collaboration, or anything else. It was a clever indictment, but it was essentially fabricated as a way to put pressure on me to testify falsely against Donald Trump, something I refused to do. The other thing that kind of perplexes me here is that there is an issue, there is a court motion which could end this long national nightmare, and that is the question of Special Counsel Jack Smith's actual appointment. You see, there is no current law which governs or justifies his appointment. Under Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, in order for him to hold this position as special counsel, he would have to be a U.S. attorney or otherwise confirmed by the U.S. Senate, and he has not been. The Supreme Court has asked Trump's lawyers twice about this in Washington, D.C., asking them why they have not raised this issue. And John Sauer, quite able but attorney for the president, has answered twice that they do not intend to bring that question before the Supreme Court. Now, the good news is that they have preserved the right to bring it in the Florida documents case, but that legal stratagem could end this entire thing, because if Jack Smith, the special counsel, were to be disqualified well, then the indictments he brought would be voided. If you're just tuning in, folks, this is Roger Stone. We got a great show for you today. As I said, Trump lawyer Alina Habba joins us. I'll tell you about our other guests on the other side, so don't go away. We'll be right back.
This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back. I'm Roger Stone. We're talking, what else? Politics. We just finished a discussion of how Trump's lawyers could conceivably end this long national nightmare by examining the Appointments Clause of the U.S. Constitution, Section 2, Article 2, which clearly states that Special Counsel Jack Smith would have to be approved, confirmed in the Senate. He holds no position. He was a private citizen. Now, this same argument was brought against Robert Mueller, who was also not a U.S. attorney. It was denied at the trial court level in my case. One of the witnesses, Andrew Miller, raised it in his objection to testimony. It was overruled by the trial court judge. It was affirmed by the D.C. Appeals Court, but it never made it to the Supreme Court. And you now have two different Supreme Court justices asking Trump's lawyers directly why they have not raised the issue. It was Judge Clarence Thomas as recently as last week. The Democrats essentially have no strategy, and therein lies the problem. They certainly cannot run on Joe Biden's stellar records. Gas prices where I am are creeping up towards $4 a gallon. There is no more strategic petroleum reserve to dip in. We used most of that to try to jigger the 2020 elections. If you look at the price of living, groceries are up 21.2% in cost. Eating out at a restaurant up 21%. Baby food up 29.6%. Pet food up 22.7%. Rent generally across the board up 20%. Electricity rates up 28.4%. Natural gas up 30%. Apparel up 12%. Used cars up 20.3%. Airfare up an astounding 31.4%. An airline ticket costs almost a third more than it used to. Public transportation's up 20.8%, while at the same time, real average weekly wages are down 4.2%. No, Joe Biden cannot run on his domestic record. Also joining us today, by the way, is CJ Pearson. He is the publisher of the Free Tribune. He is a millennial. He's going to talk to us about the turmoil in the campuses today. Really looking forward to that. And then the other, I think, stratagem for Joe Biden is to try to make this presidential election about January 6th and about these legal cases against the president. Speaking of January 6th, Owen Schroyer of the War Room joins us today to talk about why he never entered the Capitol, never engaged in violence, never damaged any property, never attacked anyone, actually did nothing other than stand on the grass outside the Capitol, yet he spent almost 4 months in jail. We're going to talk about that. The other thing I do here today is I ask for a little help. I miss more than anything else good deli, hard to find. There used to be two great delicatessens here in South Florida, Wolfie's in Miami Beach and the Rascal House, both long gone. And when I go to New York, the Carnegie Deli is no more. The Stage Deli is no more. The Second Avenue Deli is pretty good, but it's on First Avenue. Go figure. Of course, there's Cats in the Bowery, but I'd like folks to tell me, where can I find the best pastrami sandwich? Where can I find some excellent corned beef? Where do I find the best matzo ball soup? Folks, you can reach me at roger.stone@wabcradio.com. I'd like your suggestions. I want to talk about more of this in the weeks ahead. Now, I have told everyone who's been listening to the Roger Stone Show that I am half Hungarian and half Italian, which means I'm Italian from the waist down. And it has been a great kick for me to reveal some of my family recipes here on the Roger Stone Show. Every week I try to pick a different dish that was one of my dad's favorites. Last weekend it was the Hungarian stuffed cabbage. You can still find that online on my Twitter profile. You can also find it at stowzone.com. It's the WABC audio that we have simply reproduced for you. But today, before the end of the show, I'm going to give you my family recipe, my mother's recipe, therefore my grandmother's recipe for linguine and white clam sauce. This is one of the simplest dishes out there, but it's one that's very easy to screw up. In a final housekeeping matter, some of you may know that my wife, Nidia Bertrand de Espinosa Stone, recently underwent surgery to alleviate some of the painful side effects of her entirely successful cancer treatment. And I'm happy to tell all of those who've texted, emailed, written, and called, she's doing absolutely great. It is a miracle for which we thank the Lord. So Mrs. Stone in excellent spirits. And she helps me out. She goes through my mother's recipe box and helps me pick out the recipe we're going to feature each and every weekend at the Roger Stone Show. Yes, I am working on a 77 WABC cookbook. This was Margot Katsimatidis' idea. It's a great idea. It's a lot more work than I thought it would be, but relatively soon we're going to have that cookbook for you. All right, buckle your seatbelts. This is the Roger Stone Show, and as the late, great Jackie Gleason would say, away we go.
Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel? Or that white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some are fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back, folks. This is the Roger Stone Show, and for the next hour or so, we're going to be talking news, politics, history, food, style. And today I want to focus on what's happening on our campuses because, well, it's so shocking. Joining us now is CJ Pearson, who is I guess you'd be called millennial. He is a longtime friend of mine, but most importantly, he is an activist, a journalist, and somebody who I think can identify with some of those on the campuses and maybe help us understand their thinking. So, CJ, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Thank you so much, Roger, for having me. And usually I would be offended when people would call me a millennial because I'm actually Gen Z. But the way Gen Z has been acting over the course of the past few weeks, I think I'm okay with being a millennial at least this week.
I could be off by a couple years, and I apologize for that. I guess what I wanted to say was I was hoping to get someone younger than I am to help understand all this, and in that case, you most definitely qualify.
No, You're exactly right. You're exactly right. And I think, what we're seeing on our college campuses right now is the result of what we've seen, occurring for decades, which is indoctrination and not education. And we're seeing that manifest in a terrible way. You have privileged young American children, going on their campuses, siding with a terrorist organization because they believe it's the woke thing to do. Now, Roger, I've asked myself recently, when did it become woke to stand with a terrorist organization that is raping innocent women? When did it become woke to stand with an organization that is kidnapping innocent men and women from their homes? And when did it become woke to stand with a terrorist organization that doesn't only want to destroy Israel, but wants to destroy all of Western civilization? And I think that, they truly have lost the plot. But one thing I will say that I've really enjoyed, I went to the University of Alabama, and during my time there, I was a member of Greek life. I was in a fraternity. All of these fraternity guys who are standing up and fighting back against this woke nonsense, good for them. And, I hope we see more of it.
I should also mention that CJ Pearson is the publisher and editor-in-chief of the freetribune.com. You may want to check that out. So I guess here's the hard question, CJ. Do you believe that these anti-Israel protests are part of a larger coordinated effort by certain political groups or ideologies? And if so, whom? The one thing I seem to notice is enormous commonality between those who are today protesting not just in support of Palestine, but in support of Hamas, a terrorist organization. They seem in many cases to be the exact same people who were protesting on behalf of Black Lives Matter and Antifa, 2 years ago.
No, you're exactly right. There's actually recent reporting done by the Wall Street Journal that shows a direct connection between these organizations that are organizing these campus protests and George Soros, and it's not surprising at all. We're seeing literally the same tents popping up coast to coast, at UCLA, at Columbia, at Yale, at all these other schools. And, I don't believe in coincidences, especially not in an election year. And I think that this is very much intentional. But, what I will say about that, too, though, is that I think it runs the risk of backfiring. And the reason it does is because I don't think that a lot of these Palestinian protesters are going to be voting for Joe Biden either. And the reason I say that is because there was a little bit of a moment of unity, actually, at the recent protest that happened at the University of Alabama, where you literally heard on both sides, the counter-protesters and the Hamas folks, saying F Joe Biden. They were all saying it in unison, chanting it together. And I think that is why we as conservatives have got to play smart about this. We need to be fighting to make sure that Cornel West is on every single ballot, that we can get him on. Because if we do, I think that, he could be a spoiler for Biden and a depository for a lot of these, pro-Hamas Palestinian, folks who are the base of the Democrat Party these days.
Interestingly, because of a much earlier incident in which Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Was exposed by the New York Post, there's some controversy because Kennedy maintains the conversation was off the record. But reporter John Levine challenges that. But Levine reported, I think accurately, that RFK had said that that there was a study that showed that the COVID-19 vaccination posed less of a threat to people who were Jewish. It became a flap in the New York Post, but that in turn caused Kennedy to take an extreme pro-Israel position, which means that he, as an independent party candidate, with this obvious cleavage in the Democratic Party, a cleavage over the Middle East as big as the divisions over the Vietnam War in that party in 1968, he is in no position to take advantage of this politically. In other words, those in the Democratic Party who are screaming about Genocide Joe cannot cast their votes for Robert Kennedy. It's why it's interesting that you bring the Cornel West independent candidacy up.
Yeah, and I think, that will be probably who a lot of these folks look to, Jill Stein, also being, another option for them as well. There's actually pending legislation in Georgia that I'll put on the radar of your listeners here that would actually give the Green Party automatic ballot access in the state of Georgia, which they currently don't have, which would be huge, for our chances here in Georgia. Just 11,000 or so votes separated, President Trump from President Biden in November of 2020. I guarantee you more than 11,000 people would be voting for Jill Stein or Cornel West if they got ballot access in Georgia this cycle because of this Palestine issue that's really divided the Democrat Party, like you said.
I'm a little surprised by Cornel West. He's obviously very, very highly intelligent. He's a very articulate proponent for his point of view, most of which I disagree with, but I do respect him intellectually. On the other hand, had he remained as a candidate for the Green Party nomination, by my estimates, he would have gotten automatic ballot access in about 30 states, which would mean that he would only have to petition or work his way on in the balance of 20 states. And he seemed logically an excellent fit for the Green Party platform. They are anti-war, they're anti-racism, they are pro-Palestinian. Yet he bolted to run as an independent. This makes very little sense to me. I don't know what his inducement to do that would be. As I've said on this show many times, getting on the ballot as an independent is extremely difficult because the laws that are written governing ballot access for independent candidates or minor party candidates are written by Republicans and Democrats working together to avoid competition. So it's interesting. I agree with you. I think Jill Stein is going to be, assuming she gets on the ballot, set up to pick up those votes of Democrats who are unhappy with the Biden administration's handling of the Middle East. It is really an impediment to Robert Kennedy because I thought he might have been the recipient, but he's locked himself into a position essentially in which he says Israel can do no wrong. I think he will find no votes there. So, CJ, let me ask you this. Are these current protests just another attempt by these same groups and individuals to divide Americans by class, trans by straight versus straight, Black Lives Matter and Antifa, and so on? What are the purposes of these incredibly violent demonstrations?
You're exactly right. It's just literally to divide during an election year. The left runs this playbook every single election cycle. In 2016, it was BLM. In 2020, it was BLM again, but this time with a dash of COVID. They were telling everyone that they had to, socially distance and that they couldn't, go see their sick loved ones in hospitals. They couldn't go visit them in nursing homes, but they allowed, these riots to happen in cities all across our country and for them to burn down our country. And there was no public outcry about, the health concerns there. And now, they've used this issue, pertaining to Israel as another wedge issue. And, and there's nothing but time, from here on out, of course, with the convention being in Chicago, very early, to that dark day in the 60s when it previously was the DNC convention. I think it's only going to get worse from here. And I'm curious to see how they, attempt to weaponize this against the right, because, the Republicans will be blamed for this. Obviously we have nothing to do with this, but this is a Democrat-based issue. This is division within their own party, but I guarantee you, they'll find a way to do it. I'm already hearing, things right now, here in the state of Georgia, we have our Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, saying things like, letting, poll workers know that there could be an increased chance of violence at the polls. They're already setting the stage for, what could happen. And I think that, it's unfortunate that, people just may take the bait.
Violence is never the answer, folks. Never the answer. I spent 45 years in Democratic small d elective politics. We can only solve our problems at the ballot box. And that takes a free, fair, honest, and transparent election, which is actually going to be the focus of next week's show on the Roger Stone Show. Not focusing on the past, but focusing on what we must do in the future to ensure legally that we have a free, fair, honest, and transparent election. We have some election experts coming on. Again, I'm not interested in the past. I'm not going to relitigate the 2020 election. Richard Nixon didn't get elected in 1968 by whining about the 1960 election. So we're going to be talking about technologies and things that should be done. I refuse to focus on the past. Have you noticed, CJ, how the protesters don't seem to make any distinction between Hamas and the Palestinian state?
Yeah. Yeah, no, they don't at all. But, I would even say that a lot of these protesters don't even know where Palestine is or would be if it, did exist, right? I think if you showed a lot of these people a map of, the entire world, and you asked them to point to Israel on a map, they would point to New Jersey. And it's because a lot of these people have no idea, again, why they're out there, why they're protesting what they are. They have just been, indoctrinated into believing that they need to sacrifice their privilege. They need to atone, for their guilt, as, white liberals or whatever else. And that's why they're out there. And I think it's exactly why, we see the types of people out there that we do see. A large part of these arrests have been happening on campuses at, places like Emory University here in Atlanta and other schools across the country. You're seeing that a lot of these protesters don't even go to the school they're protesting at. This isn't organic at all in any way whatsoever. And I think that it's shameful that, people seem to be even willing to be paid to stand by a terrorist organization. And I think it's symbolic of dark times here in the country right now.
Palestinian leadership throughout the last 40 years has offered a state 5 times and rejected it 5 times. I don't know why this fact is completely ignored by the protesters, even though Hillary Clinton herself is on record criticizing the Palestinian leadership for their shortcomings and not accepting this offer of the formulation of a Palestinian state. The politics of this region are complicated, and I wonder how many of these protesters really understand it. It was very heartwarming to see New York City police officers where at Columbia, I believe it was, when the flag of the United States had been taken down and replaced with the Palestinian flag, New York police officers took down the Palestinian flag. They returned Old Glory to its rightful place. Unfortunately, in today's New York Police Department, they will probably be punished for their action.
No, yeah, you're exactly right. And I think, and you're also completely right with the complexity, of this issue as well. It was something of which that, I learned a lot about, throughout the years, but didn't truly understand until I went to Israel for myself. and learned it, firsthand. And I think that's, something that a lot of these people, should do. I think a lot of the lies that you hear about Israel, being an apartheid state and all of those things are quickly, torn apart as soon as you enter the country. You see Arabs, Africans, all these people living together right next to each other in perfect harmony. It kind of reminded me a little bit, of America, very westernized there. But I think that's exactly why Hamas is so dangerous, because not only do they want the destruction of Israel, they want the destruction of the ideas that make Israel Israel, things like tolerance, things like progressivism, right? That apparently the left, apparently the left is willing to discard just because, they think, again, the woke thing to do is to stand with Hamas and stand with Palestine because Israel is a big, bad oppressor, and which is the same way they view America. So it actually shouldn't be a surprise to us at all.
No, I think the one thing these anti-Israeli protesters have finally exposed is the blatant Marxist and anti-Semitic sentiments that are really far more pervasive on our universities and colleges and on the faculties of those colleges than I had ever imagined. Here's, I guess, my question. There have been accusations that these anti-Israel protests are being used as a cover for anti-Semitic sentiments overall. Would you agree with that? Why, and how do you think it relates to the broader issue of anti-Semitism in America and around the world?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, pulled back the curtain for sure. And I think it has, become, more so about anti-Semitism. I think, it's one thing to be critical of Israel, its government, Netanyahu, and his decision-making, and as we criticize our own leaders, feel free to criticize them as well. But I think that when you have, these protesters chanting things like, from the river to the sea and death to Israel, that is blatant anti-Semitism. I think advocating for the destruction of the only Jewish state in the world is blatant anti-Semitism. And I think that is what this should be. I think if this was focused on criticisms of how Netanyahu is, defending his country or protecting his people, those are valid. But at the end of the day, I disagree with them. But are they valid criticisms to make? I don't think anyone would suggest otherwise. But I think the problem is that that's not what these kids are doing right now. They're directly attacking Jewish students, preventing them from getting to class, from going to the library during actually what's finals exam time, for a lot of these schools. And, it's blatantly anti-Semitic. And the unfortunate thing is that they're unapologetic about it.
Yeah, history repeats itself. In Germany in the 1930s, German thugs associated with the SA prevented Jewish students from attending classes at the universities. We sadly have seen this all before. I'm kind of interested in the politics of it because I've obviously spent a lot of time studying the 1968 election. This is when, of course, Lyndon Johnson elected not to run again because of the unpopularity of the Vietnam War and the way the Vietnam War split that party down the middle. Most interesting, of course, is the way that President Richard Nixon, then candidate, former Vice President Richard Nixon, played the issue, which was to essentially say, look, I will end this conflict without being very specific, but never taking the position that the war should be ended immediately, also not taking the position at that juncture that the war could actually be won. I really think that the Democrats are in a very similar situation. This, if you saw President Bill Clinton and President Barack Obama and President Joe Biden, was kind of like a weekend at Bernie's moment. The two the two presidents had to prop the oldest of the three of them up. But the size of the demonstrations outside of Radio City Music Hall against Genocide Joe, I found this literally shocking. These people are not conservative Republican, folks. These people are, to the extent that they registered to vote, they're Democrats. Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is the Roger Stone Show at 77 WABC Radio. We're talking to CJ Pearson, and we'll be right back.
Hey, guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic, famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere, nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
This episode is brought to you by Factor. Optimize your nutrition this year with Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal service. Factor's fresh, never-frozen meals are dietitian approved, ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from 40 weekly options across 8 dietary preferences like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Eat smarter at factormeals.com/listen50 and use code listen50 for 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Factormeals.com/listen50. Code listen50. Terms and conditions apply.
This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back, folks. We're here with CJ Pearson of the Free Tribune. We're talking about the demonstrations that are roiling New York this past week over the Palestinian-Israel conflict. And I invited CJ to get a younger point of view for today's show. I've learned a number of things already. CJ, how do you think these anti-Israel protests and campus takeovers will affect the broader political climate in the United States? In other words, the people in Nebraska, the people in Iowa, the people in flyover country, how do they see this?
I think it's definitely showing, these middle of the road folks and these everyday Americans just how radical the base of the Democrat Party has become. And I think it's definitely going to cause a lot of them to sour upon President Biden, who's already deeply unpopular. But I think this is also going to have implications down the ballot as well. But, I'm curious to your point, that you were raising about 1968, in which LBJ decided that he wasn't going to run for re-election because of the unpopularity of the Vietnam War. You have to wonder, and it hasn't been covered this way by the media, and maybe that's out of intentionality. But what is this somehow, setting up an issue where they could ask Biden to step aside because of how divided the Democrat Party is under his leadership? I think it may possibly be. I think, there's always in the conspiracy theory that they'd ask Biden to step down because of his, lack of, mental acuity and all of those things. Maybe this is the issue that, sidelines him. Now, they wouldn't be able to replace him with Kamala because, she's been a part of the administration. People would say that there was blood on her hands as well. But I think there's someone else that they could maybe put in who hasn't had anything to do with this issue, right? Who has no foreign policy involvement in their current position. And, some would say that's Gavin Newsom. And, and Michelle Obama certainly doesn't have any foreign policy involvement these days. And so it would be interesting to see if we see that kind of bait and switch coming up soon.
When you consider the crucial role of Muslim American voters in Michigan, in Minnesota, and pockets of them in virtually every swing state, they're a crucial part of Joe Biden's winning coalition if he can put it back together. Understanding his personality, he'll never drop out of this race because he was frustrated in the implementation of his foreign policy. He's far more likely to use his health as an excuse. But I've said for many months, I continue to say, that the nomination process has been rigged for Biden. So he faces no real opposition inside the party. He will roll to July to get more than enough delegates to be renominated. He would presumably ask Kamala Harris to be his running mate, although that is not at all certain. There is some reporting that Biden still resents the fact that Kamala Harris essentially challenged him as a racist during the 2020 Democratic presidential debates, and that he only took her for vice president under extreme pressure from President Barack Obama, and that Joe Biden would now like to switch Kamala Harris out for Gretchen Whitmer, who currently serves in his cabinet and served, of course, as governor of Michigan. I could see that happening. In other words, to be very clear, I've never said that Michelle Obama would run for president. That's not what I've said. What I've said is that I could see a situation in which Joe Biden, just before the convention, announces that it is not his intention to run again. He's not resigning as president, but he's not going to run again. And then technically release his delegates at the Democratic National Committee and let the National Convention essentially adopt any candidate or draft any candidate they wanted. If that were to happen, then there's very little question in my mind that the most popular Democrat in the party is Michelle Obama. Now, can she be persuaded? Can she be drafted? That remains to be seen. But if they go to her and they say, you are the only Democrat who can beat Donald Trump, you have to save the country from Donald Trump, I could very well see this scenario playing out. Now, people I know who know the Obamas tell me she has no interest. She hates politics. We know that part's not true. Great documentary called Michelle Obama 2024 by my friend Joel Gilbert. It's a companion book that he's written. He's been on the Roger Stone show here to talk about it. Probably will be again. I very much see that as a genuine possibility. The war, however, while I think it could be the reality of the reason that Joe withdraws, although his health is a legitimate concern, the prices today are a legitimate concern. The inflation, the gasoline prices, all legitimate concerns. I mean, since I read the list earlier on the show, I just got a text message. The cost of cocoa up 345%. The cost of orange juice up 260%. The cost of olive oil 219%. The cost of sugar 120%. Fruit snacks 77%, cooking oil 54%, chocolate bars 52%, applesauce a whopping 51%, beef 51% up, simple mayonnaise 50% up, a loaf of bread up 42%, eggs up 40%, milk up 40%, cereal up 38%, butter up 24%. No, that is not the record of a man who can win re-election. What was it James Carville said? It's the economy, stupid. So it remains to be seen. We'll be watching in the days just before the Democratic National Convention to see if these campus riots, which I think are not only going to increase but intensify, so split the Democratic Party that Joe Biden is forced to step aside, not resign as president, because then he would lose the ability to pardon himself, his son, his brother, and others of the Biden crime family of what is emerging as absolute stone cold proof of crime, but just not be a candidate again. CJ Pearson, we're about out of time. You get the final word.
Well, thank you so much, Roger. And, you're, of course, as right as always. And I do worry about, the prospect of Michelle Obama candidacy. I think that, suburban women like her. They really do. And that has been, a demographic that we have historically been struggling with. And I think, the question would remain, would President Trump's gains with the minority communities, particularly black men, offset that, in the event of a potential candidacy there. But, at the end of the day right now, we got to focus on beating Joe Biden. I think that every single day he beats himself. We've just got to keep the momentum going. And I think that the division exists on the Democrat Party. And I think that we've got to be proactive in ensuring that that's made clear. The Republican Party is not divided right now. We are all behind President Trump and his administration and bringing it back. It is the Democrats who are absolutely in complete chaos and disarray. So let's keep them playing defense and let's play some offense.
All right, CJ Pearson, thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Sunday on The Roger Stone Show.
At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 300 programs at asuonline.asu.edu.